Hey everyone, it's Ty. This is my garage. Welcome to Ty's Garage. That's what this show's called because it's my garage. That's what we do here in my garage. These, if you know about Subaru engines, these are head gaskets because that is what we're doing today. We're going to put head gaskets on the Rally engine. That's what we're doing today. Hopefully it will go in without any issue. So stay tuned. Alright everyone, these are the heads we're putting in the Subaru engine. These are heads off of a 2.2 liter Phase I Subaru engine of some sort. If you'll notice, they're unique in that they are what they call single port exhaust. Of course, they're called single port exhaust because there is a single port for the exhaust, but there are yet two intake ports on the intake. These are kind of rare heads. You don't see a lot of these, but they're not like, sought after, rare. They're not going to be the best for the power we want to get, but it is what it is. They are what we have. They are back from the machine shop. They came back from a place here in St. Louis called Terry's Machine Shop. It was done overnight. I had dropped them off on Monday. They called me Tuesday to tell me they were done. So kudos to Terry's. It was pretty affordable based on how very few engines have ever done, which is zero. I only paid $130 to have the pair of them decked, and they also fluid tested them to make sure my valves were seating properly and were in good shape with the heads. Now, I had a bit of an existential crisis here, namely because I didn't know which head was which. I didn't know which head was driver's side, which head was passenger side. The heads that came off of this block, the 2.5 liter heads, they were clearly labeled. Driver, passenger, left or right. I can't remember how they were labeled. Everything was labeled. The camshafts were labeled. The bearing races were labeled. The heads were labeled. Everything was engraved on the heads, making it way easier for me to know what is going where. But these, nothing. I couldn't find anything to indicate what heads went where. So of course, naturally, my head went, well, is there that much of a difference? I know the bolt pattern is the same. The mating surface is the same. They both have 4 intake valves and 4 exhaust valves. I figured, and they're both going to be timed right. I figured as long as I put the right camshafts in the right heads, what difference did it make? But then I realized if you put them on the wrong side, you'll have exhaust going out the top or an intake going down the bottom. That's wrong, obviously. So the key is knowing which camshaft goes in which head. But of course, the camshafts aren't labeled either. I was able to use the fact that any engine has that offset of the cylinder banks to accommodate putting both piston rods on the crankshaft. So using that, I realized that the longer crankshaft, the longer camshaft is going to go on the offset side, the side that's offset more towards the rear of the vehicle. And with that, I was able to determine that this one here, this is our driver's side, this is our passenger side. And other than they should just bolt on perfectly fine. So let's get to bolting them on. Alright, we're going to talk a little bit about the head gaskets real quick. There's a lot of head gasket choices on the market. Of course, you can go with an OEM Subaru head gasket. Some other brands you hear about, Felpro, 6-star. And these, I went with these. These are from a brand called Cometic. Somebody out there is going to correct me on that. I got these from Summit. These are actually 40 thousandths. These are designed for this type of engine build. They're not exactly designed for the 2.5 or the 2.2. They're really recommended for the 2.5 2.2 hybrid. They make this in a couple thicknesses. I think they make it in a 22 thousandths, a 40 thousandths, and I think a 56 thousandths. I think I've heard of one step higher. This is the one that came highly recommended, and this is the one we're going to go with. Now, because of the way these are built, there's not really a right or wrong way to put it on if you know what you're doing. There's 2 guide pins that pretty much put it where we need to put it. If you look at it, these are oil passages here. They line up. My bolt holes all line up. My coolant passages all line up. This here, okay, so you got bolt, 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 bolt. This hole is actually an oil return line of some sort. This is how you know you've got it on right, when the oval matches up to the oil return line. I think sometimes I have seen this be an oval machined into the engine. so it makes it even easier. But the head gaskets are the same left and right, and they're basically going to go on the other side. They'll pretty much, this bolt pattern will be just flipped around to where it bolts up just the same. Now, almost every brand of gasket, whether it's Felpro or 6-Star or Cometic, they're going to have their stamp on it. The stamp goes towards the top of the engine. Obviously, this is the bottom of the engine because we have the oil pan and oil valley in here. So this is how this head gasket needs to go on. It's a little floppy. It's a multi-layered steel gasket. That's naturally the way it is. It's just got some spring tension to it. That will be leveled out once we bolt the heads on. Now, if you know anything about Subaru engines and how their heads are bolted on, if there's some voodoo magic, crazy 8-step program for bolting them on, that's because they're steel gaskets. We also are using stretch bolts, and I'm sure they've got, some of that process is just attributed to having it being done the Subaru way. But it's a matter of stretching the head gaskets and stretching the bolts. So there's a lot of tightening to a certain spec. Any kind of gaskets can be tightened in a certain bolt order. Tighten them in the right order, tighten them again even tighter, loosen, tighten, and eventually everything goes together just fine. So technically speaking, our head gasket's on the deck. We're ready to put a head on this block. So grab the head and we'll start putting it on. Alright everyone, this is the head that goes on this side. I know because the cam is in my left hand. Of course, it will be facing the opposite direction, just like the crankshaft here once it's bolted up. This came from the machine shop, pretty much ready to go. Just a matter of pretty much just setting it down on top of the guide pins. You kind of want to grab it by your intake runners and your exhaust runners. That way, you don't risk touching the mating surface at all. And just like that, the head is on the engine. Of course, it needs to be installed. Something else you might notice is if you look, I've got a lot of stuff missing from the top of this head, and the reason for that is basically that's how it came to me. When I got these heads off of Craigslist, because I did get them off of Craigslist, basically they were just heads torn down just to the valves and the springs. Cams were in a Tupperware bin, wrapped in a shop cloth individually. Cam gears, lifter assemblies or rocker assemblies. So I guess it would be rockers in this instance. So there's a lot that still needs to be done with these heads. These heads are by no means built and ready to go. But I just kind of put the camshaft in to kind of help me understand which side is which. So the head is on the deck now. Now we just got to go get our head bolts and start tightening them up. Alright, I've got a whole bag of brand new head bolts from Subaru. The head bolts are pretty much the same across every engine, at least around this era. So, of course, this engine's out of a 97 Legacy. These heads are off a 96 or so Impreza, and it's going in a 95 Impreza. So walking into the parts department and saying, I need stuff for a Subaru engine is not good enough. Luckily, I managed to find part numbers in forums. I'm going to be posting all the part numbers in the description in case any of you guys are doing this exact same build or just curious as to what I was using in this build. That way, there's another resource to help you get parts for what you're doing. Working in a glorified parts shop, having part numbers ready and available, it makes things so much easier than the guys behind the counter. That way, there's no there's no miscommunication. There's no chance that they mishear you when you say I need head bolts for this engine and they give you head bolts for another engine. It basically puts all the responsibility on you. But if you know what you're getting, you know what you want, that makes it just that much easier. So strongly recommend looking at part numbers, whether it's working on cars, working on your vacuum cleaner, your RC cars, whatever. Part numbers make the world a lot easier. Now, an option a lot of engine builders will use are head studs. The difference between head bolts and head studs, of course, is that these are bolts and studs are studs. Studs are going to bolt into the engine, and then they're going to have a male threaded rod that we would tighten a nut onto. The advantage to any kind of head studs, namely ARP head studs, is that they're reusable. People try to reuse head bolts, and I don't understand why. Actually, I do understand why, because they're freaking expensive. But they stretch. I can sit down and compare one of these brand new to one of the ones I pulled off the engine, and you'd probably be able to see some stretching, some difference in length or thread pitch or something. And when you go through the process that we're about to go through on this engine, you'll see how and why these things are stretching, and it's all part of the game. So naturally, they're designed to stretch. So let them stretch. If if you use them once, they're done. If you screw up, go buy more. The cost of ARP head studs that for an EJ257, which isn't the same block, we didn't even know if it was going to work. They were like $300 or $400 for a full set. So naturally, I think I spent $70 at the parts store on these. Not just these are Subaru brand. I went to the dealer for these, so I'd have to screw this engine up like 4 or 5 times just to justify it and say, man, I wish I would have bought those ARP head studs. So for what we're doing right now, I'm sticking with the Subaru brand head bolts, and that's good enough for me. Right now I'm just kind of setting them down on the head while I pull them all out. They've all got black paint on them, on the heads. I'm not really sure why. I know if you pull head bolts off of a Subaru engine, it's my understanding that OEM, you'll find that the corners are painted with that Subaru STI red or pink, but the middle 2 bolts, they are done in a different color or not at all. And I mean, the reason for this, of course, and you'll understand this when I show you the specs, the corners get a different torque spec. And I guess the reason for that is in case you want to risk it and reuse your used stretched head bolts, at least you won't be shot in the dark trying to understand which ones go where. Again, I'm not risking it with this build. I'm risking it in other areas, so I don't need to risk it anywhere else. All right, now in this this brake clean cap, I just poured some oil, some motor oil. Basically, the point of the motor oil is just to assist in the threads going in. We don't want to douse this thing in oil. Naturally, there's only so much space for these threads to go, and we don't want to, create like an air vacuum or any chance for, a buildup in pressure when these things thread all the way in. So just the slightest bit should be enough to get us started. I'm threading it very slowly by hand first, just to make sure that we're not cross-threading it, and just to make sure that we got a good seated bolt. Long way to go before we even start really applying any pressure to the bolts. I'm just kind of doing like the first 3/8 of an inch, and just kind of letting it run down the threads. Something important to note, I'll just point out right here in case you haven't already noticed, these head bolts are actually a 12-point socket. Not quite sure what the point is of 12-point sockets, but you need one. You can't do it without it. So if you don't already have a 14mm 12-point socket, you're going to need one. So run to the auto parts store like I had to and get one. There we go. Given the work environment, I mean, ideally I'd have some table or something that I could set all this stuff on, so I'm not setting it on the deck I'm working on, but it is what it is. Worst case scenario, I spill oil in what is already an oil passage. So nothing can really go wrong with that. Oil is supposed to be in here, so big deal. Alright, now I've started all these bolts. These are just snug. Alright, none of them are down to torque yet. Okay, I just want to get all the extra thread down before I started really torquing these things down. Now, real quick, I want to mention on this particular head, now not all Subaru heads are like this, but this one, on this 2.2, we have what they call external head bolts, and obviously that means the head bolts are external. They are not underneath any of the cams. They are not. They can be accessed without even taking the valve cover off. The type of heads that this thing had on it before, the 2.5 liter Phase I dual overhead cam heads, those required me to take all the bearing caps off of each of the cams, take the cams out, and that was how I was able to access the six head bolts. Now, if you can imagine having cams over these, that shows just how much larger those stock those stock heads were than these smaller 2.2 liter heads. So let's start by going over the bolt pattern. The bolt pattern is as follows. Bolt number 1, bolt number 2. Jumps up to here for 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's how we will tighten them in all steps. That's how we will loosen them in all steps, in that order. These are referred to as bolts 1 and 2, bolts 3, 4, 5, 6. So that is the order. So naturally, we're just going to start with this bolt. We're going to take it to the first step in this process. The first step in this process is tightening all these down to a torque of 22 foot-pounds. Some torque wrenches are measured in inch-pounds. If that's the case, you just need to divide. Actually, I'm sorry. If your torque wrench is measured in inch-pounds, you need to multiply the amount of foot-pounds we're torquing to by 12. For example, if my math serves, 22 foot-pounds should equate to 264 inch-pounds. So be aware that your torque wrench might be measured in a different unit than foot-pounds, and you'll need to do conversions. So I've already got my torque wrench set to 22 foot-pounds, and that being the case, we're ready to start tightening that first head bolt. Now, if you've never used a torque wrench before, you pretty much just like any other ratchet, it's just that when you get to a certain torque, you will hear a resounding click on the torque wrench. You gotta watch out for times when bolts squeak and things like that. You want to feel that click. How ironic, I can't tell if I'm hitting it or not. Here's what we'll do. We'll loosen it up to a lower torque that I'm sure I'm not at yet, like 4 foot-pounds. There you go. You see how it does that like notched click? We're not there yet. Loosen it up. Take it back up to, what is that, 15? 21, 22 foot-pounds. Tighten it up. There we go. 22 foot-pounds. We're going to go all the way around, do all the bolts that way, in that order. There we go, 22. Alright, all of our bolts are bolted down to 22 foot-pounds of torque. The next step requires us to bolt them down at, in the same order, at 51 foot-pounds of torque. Now, as you're watching me bolt these down, you watch my torque wrench click. You'll notice there's not really anything on a torque wrench to prevent you from over tightening. You have to be really aware when you're doing this, so as to know, be prepared for that thing to click. Because as soon as it clicks, you basically got to be able to pull that thing off and prevent it from going any further. Especially when it's critical when working with gaskets. As soon as that thing clicks, you got to stop. Because after it clicks, there's nothing to stop you from pulling it any further. At least not on my torque wrench. My higher end torque wrenches might have some kind of clutch mechanism. I'm not sure, but not this one. So we've got it dialed into 51 foot-pounds of torque. So same process. We're just going to go through and there we go. Now, obviously, you should have your engine stand, you know, secured. There we go. Alright, for the next step, we actually want to go through and loosen all of these by 180 degrees. So it's good when you're doing this to kind of get an idea of, you know, clocking your ratchet, your breaker bar, what have you, at a certain you know, clock position, and then knowing that you have to get that thing to 180 degrees of where it is right now. So again, in the bolt pattern that we're used to, start with bolt number 1. Okay. 180, 180, 180, 180, 180, and 180. You do that twice, by the way. You don't do it just once. These things are kind of loose now, but that's the way the rules are. So now we have to tighten our center bolts down to 25 foot-pounds of torque apiece. And the reason for that is because the place in the head gasket that fails most often is between the two cylinder walls. You have explosion up against an explosion with only 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch of aluminum wall between the two. That's the most critical part. You blow that up, it's just going to deteriorate into a whole mess. So it's very critical that that spot is tight. There's 2. Now the rest of the bolts, these get bolted down to only 11 foot-pounds. They're tight, but they're not that tight, you know. 11. 11. The click's going to be a lot smaller for 11, so you got to be careful, be mindful of when the thing finally clicks. So, alright, the last 2 steps, we're going to go through all the bolts in order, rotating them an additional 90 degrees. So 90 degrees them all once, then another 90 degrees on all of them again. And we should have a good seated gasket. So three, 4, 6. What I'm doing with this thing, I'm cheating it as a breaker bar because I don't have a 3/8 breaker bar right now with me. And what I'm doing is I'm just setting it to an unrealistically high torque spec, so that way it doesn't just torque out. It's just going to act like a breaker bar because we won't hit the torque this thing will stop at. So I guess I don't expect to. Four. And 6. Alright everyone, I'm a hot sweaty mess and we just got the first of 2 heads bolted onto the car. I am going to just do the second head just like this one. They're exactly the same. I'm not going to film it. I figured 1-cylinder head's good enough for you guys. But yeah, that's how they go together. Fairly simple process. Once you lay it all out in front of you, I'll have the steps in the description. I'll have a couple of links in the description. And yeah, so this is the same process as far as I know for every Subaru head. It seems like it's, you know, daunting at first, but when you sit down and just do it in the right order, you should feel confident that it'll work. So thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.